The morning came without ceremony. 4:30, same as always. Marcus Wade woke in the dark to silence so complete it pressed against his eardrums like water. No alarm needed. His body knew the hour the way it knew hunger, thirst, the warning ache before rain. He sat up in bed, feet finding the cold floor. The room held the shapes of 30 years. Dresser his father built. Chair where Sarah used to fold laundry. Window facing east toward fields that had fed his family since 1947. All of it familiar as his own heartbeat. All of it empty. Duke stirred from his corner, tags jingling. The German shepherd stretched, 9 years old now, gray creeping into his muzzle. Marcus reached down, fingers finding the warm fur behind the dog's ears. "You ready, boy?" Not a question. Statement of fact. They moved through the house together, Marcus in worn jeans and a flannel shirt soft from 1,000 washings. His boots sat by the door where he'd left them last night, crusted with yesterday's mud. He pulled them on without looking, muscle memory guiding his hands through laces he could tie blind. The kitchen smelled like coffee and silence. Marcus filled the same chipped mug he'd used for 20 years, white ceramic with a hairline crack running down one side. Sarah had bought it at a church sale in 1990. He'd offered to replace it a dozen times. Never did. The first sip burned his tongue. He welcomed it. The pain meant the day had started, meant work waited, meant hours he could fill with tasks that required no thought beyond the next step forward. He stood at the window drinking coffee while the sky shifted from black to charcoal. The land stretched out before him, 180 acres of Iowa soil that had broken stronger men than him. His grandfather bought it in 47 coming back from the Pacific. His father worked it until the day he dropped dead between rows, 61 years old, heart attack, quick and clean. Marcus inherited it at 23, young and stupid enough to think he could make it work. 41 years later, he was still trying. Duke nosed his leg. Time to move. Marcus rinsed his mug, set it upside down on the dish rack. Everything in its place. Order was the difference between surviving and going under. He'd learned that truth in the Gulf in 91, learned it again every spring when the banks came around asking questions about yields and margins. They stepped outside into October air sharp enough to make his eyes water. The work lights mounted on the barn threw long shadows across gravel. Marcus walked the same path he walked every morning. Boots crunching on stone, breath misting white. He checked the equipment barn first. Tractor, combine, planter, all hibernating until spring. Oil levels, tire pressure, battery connections. His notebook came out, small spiral-bound thing he'd carried since 95. He wrote down readings, checking them against yesterday's numbers. Everything the same, everything stable. Duke trotted ahead, nose to the ground, following scent trails only he could read. Marcus envied him sometimes. The simplicity of a dog's world. Food, sleep, loyalty, no mortgage, no memories of better days, no wondering if the ache in your chest at 3 a.m. meant heart trouble or just loneliness. They walked the perimeter next. South fence line, west fence line, north. Marcus knew every post, every wire, every weak spot that needed attention come spring. The land rolled gently here, Iowa prairie land that had been forest once, centuries back. Now it was corn and soybeans, rotation farming, the math of nitrogen and phosphorus and soil pH. But the southeast corner had always troubled him. They reached it as the sun broke the horizon, pale light washing across fields stubbled with last month's harvest. Marcus stopped at the fence line, looking down the gentle slope toward the old drainage ditch. This section always ran wet, even after 3 weeks without rain, even after summers that baked the topsoil to concrete. This corner stayed damp, darker, wrong somehow in ways Marcus had never bothered to name. The corn here yellowed early every year. Stalks that looked healthy from a distance came up thin when you pulled them, roots shallow and pale. He'd tested the soil twice, sent samples to the age extension office. Results came back normal, slightly acidic, nothing alarming, but the corn knew better. Corn didn't lie. Duke circled the area, staying 10 feet back. Wouldn't go closer. Marcus had noticed it years ago, filed it away as another quirk of the land. Dogs were sensitive to things men missed, probably caught scent of fox den or coyote marking. Nothing to worry about. But this morning the smell hit different. Marcus tilted his head, breathing deep. There, underneath the earth smell, the rotting vegetation smell, something else. Metallic, chemical, faint but present, like tasting copper on your tongue. He stood there as the sun climbed higher, warming his back through the flannel shirt. Duke whined, wanting to move on, but Marcus stayed, staring at that patch of dark earth. And for the first time in 20 years of owning this land, he wondered what exactly his boots were standing on. The mail came at 11:15. Marcus was in the machine shop, rebuilding a carburetor that didn't need rebuilding, finding work to fill the hours before lunch. The sound of the mail truck on the county road brought Duke's head up. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag black with grease and walked out to the mailbox. Bills, mostly. Electric company. Propane. Fertilizer supplier. A flyer for a farm auction 3 counties over. And underneath it all, an envelope that made his hands stop moving. Heavy paper. Cream-colored. Return address embossed in black ink. Lawrence and Cole, LLC, attorneys at law. Des Moines address, no window envelope, no bulk mail stamp, personal correspondence. Marcus turned it over in his hands. He'd been farming for 4 decades, and lawyers didn't send letters to farmers unless something had gone wrong. Taxes, usually, or estate issues, or code violations. His mind went through the checklist. Property taxes paid. No one left to leave him anything. Permits up to date far as he knew. He walked back to the house carrying the envelope like it might explode. Duke followed, sensing tension the way dogs do. Inside, Marcus set it on the kitchen table, stared at it, made fresh coffee, sat down, picked it up, set it back down. The clock on the wall ticked. 12 beats, 20, 40. He opened it. The letter was 2 pages, single-spaced, formatted with the cold precision of legal documents everywhere. Marcus read it once, understanding only half. Read it again, slower. Third time through, the meaning crystallized like ice forming on a window. Dear Mr. Wade, we represent certain interests concerned with environmental stewardship and regulatory compliance in Cedar County. Recent regional assessment has identified potential environmental irregularities in proximity to your property located at Rural Route 7, Section 14. While no formal allegations are being made at this time, our clients wish to ensure full compliance with all applicable state and federal environmental regulations. The language went on like that, soft words wrapped around hard meanings: voluntary cooperation, mutual benefit, access requested for preliminary inspection, timeline of 30 days, contact information below. Marcus set the letter down, picked it up, read it again. No accusation. That was the dangerous part. If they'd accused him of something specific, he could fight it, prove them wrong, but this was fog, shapeless and advancing. They wanted access to his property to look for problems they wouldn't name, representing clients they wouldn't identify, for purposes they described as compliance but felt like something else entirely. He walked to the window. Afternoon sun slanted across the fields. Everything looked normal, peaceful. His land, his legacy, his life's work spread out under an October sky so blue it hurt to look at. His laptop sat on the counter where it always sat, dusty from disuse. Marcus didn't trust computers much, preferred paper and pen, but he kept the thing around for soil reports and seed orders. He opened it now, wading through the slow boot-up, fingers drumming against the counter. Lawrence and Cole, LLC. He typed it into the search bar. The website loaded. Professional. Sleek. Practice areas listed like a menu. Environmental law. Corporate defense. Regulatory compliance. The attorney bios ran 3 pages deep, headshots of serious people in serious suits. He didn't recognize any names. He searched deeper, found a news article from 2 years back. Lawrence and Cole representing Agri-Central Industries and EPA dispute over wastewater permits. Case settled, terms confidential. Agri-Central Industries. Marcus knew that name. Everyone in Iowa knew that name. Chemical and fertilizer production. 14 facilities across the Midwest. Corporate headquarters in Omaha. Revenue in the billions. They'd been in Iowa since the 50s, back when they were called something else. Mid-States Chemical, maybe. His father had mentioned them once or twice. Marcus closed the laptop, stood at the counter. The letter sat on the table behind him. 2 pages of careful language that suddenly felt less like a request and more like a warning shot. He thought about Walt Hendricks, the man he'd bought this land from back in 2004. Old Walt, 78 years old, farm in the family for 3 generations. Marcus remembered the closing, remembered Walt's hands shaking as he signed the papers. Remembered the old man pausing, starting to say something, then stopping. What had he said? Something about drainage. Old drainage system from the 50s? Don't go poking around down there. Marcus had nodded, not really listening, focused on the numbers, the loan terms, the risk he was taking on buying 180 acres at his age. He hadn't asked questions, hadn't thought to ask questions. The phone sat on the wall, old rotary model that still worked fine. Marcus picked it up, dialed information, got transferred twice before reaching Lawrence and Cole's main line. This is Marcus Wade. I received a letter. Can you hold, please, Mr. Wade? Smooth jazz for 90 seconds. Then a voice, male, professional, totally empty of emotion. Mr. Wade, thank you for calling. I'm Robert Lawrence, senior partner. I'm glad you reached out. What's this about? As the letter indicates, we have reason to believe there may be environmental concerns related to your property. Our clients wish to ensure compliance. Who are your clients? I'm not at liberty to disclose that at this time, but I can assure you this is purely precautionary. You want to inspect my land? With your cooperation, yes. Soil sampling, groundwater testing, standard environmental assessment. And if I say no, a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Mr. Wade, I would strongly advise cooperation. If concerns are elevated to regulatory authorities without your participation, the process becomes considerably more complicated. We're offering you the opportunity to address this proactively. Address what? You haven't told me what the problem is. As I said, we're being precautionary. Better to investigate now than face regulatory action later. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. 41 years he'd worked this land. 41 years of sweat and debt and watching crop prices swing like a drunk on a rope. Now someone in a suit in Des Moines wanted to come onto his property looking for problems they wouldn't name. I need to think about it. Of course, but please note the timeline in the letter. 30 days, Mr. Wade. After that, we may have no choice but to involve state authorities. The line went dead. Marcus hung up the phone and stood in his kitchen, surrounded by the accumulated silence of 7 years alone. Outside, Duke barked at something. A squirrel, probably, or a shadow. The dog was getting old, seeing threats where none existed. Or maybe the threats had always been there and Marcus was just now learning to see them. That night, he pulled out the box from the hall closet, documents he'd kept from the property purchase. Deed, title insurance, survey maps, disclosure forms. He spread them across the kitchen table, reading by the overhead light while Duke snored in the corner. The survey map showed property lines, easements, the county road access. In the southeast corner, a dotted line marked agricultural drainage circa 1950s. Nothing unusual about that. Half the farms in Iowa had old tile drainage, clay pipes running underground to move excess water off fields. His grandfather probably installed similar systems. But Marcus pulled out the county plat map next, older document from the historical society he'd gotten when researching property history. This one dated to 1958. Same dotted line in the same location. But here it was labeled differently. Industrial Drainage Easement, Mid-States Chemical Corporation. Not agricultural, industrial. Marcus sat back in his chair, stared at those 2 words until they stopped making sense, then started making too much sense. He thought about the dark soil in the southeast corner, the corn that wouldn't grow right, the chemical smell on hot summer days, Duke refusing to walk there. 20 years of small wrongnesses he'd dismissed as quirks of the land. The box held one more document, settlement statement from the purchase. He'd paid $180,000 for the property, cheap even in 2004. He remembered the realtor saying Walt was motivated to sell, wanted to move to Arizona where his daughter lived. Quick closing, no contingencies. At the bottom of the statement, in Walt's shaky handwriting, a note Marcus had never noticed before, or had noticed and forgotten. 4 words. Forgive me for this. Marcus looked at those words for a long time. Then he stood up, walked to the window. 3:45 a.m., according to the kitchen clock. Too early for coffee, too late to sleep. He stood in the dark watching his reflection in the glass, and behind his reflection, the land stretching out invisible under stars. Somewhere out there, underneath the soil, his family had worked for 3 generations. Something waited. Something Walt Hendricks had known about. something a Des Moines law firm representing agri-central industries wanted to find before anyone else did. Marcus made a decision then, the kind of decision that changes the shape of a life. He would find out what was buried on his land. Not because lawyers asked him to, not because corporations wanted access, but because this was his land and he deserved to know what he'd been standing on for 20 years. He would need tools, a shovel, sample jars, gloves, camera. He had all of it in the barn, equipment for soil testing he did every spring. This would be different though. This wouldn't be checking nitrogen levels. This would be excavation, investigation, the kind of thing that once started, couldn't be stopped. Duke lifted his head, watching Marcus move around the kitchen. The dog knew something had shifted. Dogs always knew. "The rest you coming, boy?" They went outside together into the pre-dawn cold. Marcus gathered what he needed from the barn, an old entrenching tool from his army days, folding shovel with a sharp edge, heavy rubber gloves, mason jars from canning supplies Sarah had left behind. His Polaroid camera, ancient thing but it worked, didn't need computers or cloud storage. Just instant proof that couldn't be erased. He loaded everything into the bed of his truck and drove out to the southeast corner. Killed the engine, sat listening to the tick of cooling metal. This was the moment. Crossed this line and there was no going back to not knowing. Marcus got out of the truck. The ground was softer here, even after weeks without rain. His boots sank an inch with each step. Duke stayed by the truck, whining low in his throat. Smart dog, smarter than his owner probably. Marcus chose a spot near the old drainage ditch where the discoloration was darkest. He knelt down, pressed his palm flat against the earth. Cool, slightly damp. Nothing unusual you could name, just wrong in ways the body understood before the mind caught up. He unfolded the entrenching tool and started digging. The first 6 inches came away easy. Topsoil, dark and rich, same as anywhere else on the property. Another 6 inches. Same story. He was starting to think maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe this was paranoia, old man jumping at shadows. Then the shovel hit something that rang like metal on metal. Marcus stopped, set down the tool, used his gloved hands to clear away soil. Careful now, deliberate. His fingers found it. Hard surface, cold. He dug faster, clearing a 2-foot section, brushing away dirt until he could see it clearly in the growing dawn light. Pipe, cast iron, maybe 10 inches in diameter. Old but intact. Runs of rust along the seams, but the metal underneath still solid. And there, barely visible under accumulated grime, stenciled lettering. Mid-States in 1957. Marcus sat back on his heels. His breath came short and fast like he'd been running. This wasn't agricultural drainage. This was industrial infrastructure. And it was still here, still whole, running underneath his fields like an artery carrying God knew what. He pulled out the Polaroid. The flash was too bright in the dim morning. He took 12 photos from different angles, waiting for each one to develop, shaking them gently. The images emerged ghostly at first, then solidifying. Proof. The mason jars came next. He dug down along the pipe, taking soil samples at different depths. 18 inches, 32 inches. 4 feet down where the soil turned gray and smelled wrong. Each sample went into its own jar, labeled with marker. Date, time, location, depth. He worked methodically the way the Army had trained him 30 years ago. Document everything. Assume nothing. Trust the evidence. By the time he finished, the sun had cleared the horizon. Marcus stood up, joints creaking, back protesting. His jeans were filthy. His hands ached even through the gloves. But he had what he needed. 12 photographs, 6 soil samples, and the knowledge that whatever this pipe carried, it ran straight through the heart of his land. He loaded everything into the truck. Duke jumped in beside him, pressed against his leg like the dog could sense the fear Marcus wouldn't name out loud. They drove back to the house in silence. Marcus didn't fill in the hole. Let it stay open. He'd be going back. Inside, he laid everything out on the kitchen table. The photos formed a timeline tracking the pipe's direction. It ran northeast to southwest, arrow straight in a way nothing natural ever ran. He pulled out the county plat map again, overlaid it mentally with what he'd found. The pipe entered his property from the northeast. That direction led to the old Mid-States chemical plant, 5 miles away. Now owned by Agri-Central Industries, the pipe exited his property to the southwest, continuing toward Marcus traced the line with his finger. Toward the Chen farm, or what used to be the Chen farm, before Harold Chen died in '83. He sat very still, remembering something, a story his father had told him once, years ago, about a farmer who tried to sue Mid-States back in the '70s, claimed the company was poisoning his land. Case got thrown out. Farmer died not long after. Cancer or heart attack. Marcus couldn't remember which. Harold Chen had to be. And if the pipe ran through Chen's land 30 years ago, and Chen tried to sue, and the case got dismissed, then whatever was in this pipe, someone had worked very hard to keep it secret. Marcus looked at the jars of soil sitting on his table. Dark earth that held 40 years of history. Truth buried so deep most people forgot to look for it. But it was there, waiting. His phone rang. The sound made him jump. He stared at it for 3 rings before picking up. "Mr. Wade, this is Robert Lawrence. I wanted to follow up on our conversation." Marcus said nothing. "Mr. Wade, are you there?" "I'm here. Have you considered our request?" "I'm still thinking about it." A pause. Then the lawyer's voice, harder now, professional courtesy stripped away. "Mr. Wade, I should inform you that if you decline to cooperate, we will have no choice but to notify the Iowa Department of Natural Resources of potential contamination on your property. They will require access. They will conduct their own investigation, and if contamination is found, you as the property owner will be held responsible for cleanup costs. We're talking millions of dollars, Mr. Wade. Your cooperation now could save you considerable trouble later." Marcus looked at the jars on his table, the photographs, the pipe running through his land like a secret vein. "How long you known about this?" "Excuse me." "The contamination. How long has your client known?" Silence on the line. Then Lawrence's voice, very careful. "I don't know what you mean." "Yeah," Marcus said, "you do." He hung up. The rest of the day Marcus spent in the barn, thinking. The lawyer had just confirmed what the pipe suggested. This wasn't speculation. This was real. Contamination real enough that a billion-dollar company was sending lawyers to threaten farmers into silence. The smart play would be to sell. Take whatever money they offered and walk away. He was 56 years old, no family, no reason to fight. Except Sarah died at 49. Lung cancer, sudden and vicious, taking her from diagnosis to grave in 8 months. The doctors couldn't explain it. No smoking, no radon, no family history. Just bad luck, they said. But she'd lived on this land for 20 years. Drank water from the well that pulled from the same aquifer that pipe probably drained into. Breathed air that carried whatever vapors rose from that dark soil in the southeast corner. Bad luck. Marcus stood in the barn as afternoon faded to evening. Duke sat beside him, patient as stone, and Marcus made his second decision of the day. He wasn't selling. He wasn't cooperating. He was going to find out exactly what had been done to his land and who had done it and why. But first he needed time. Time to investigate before lawyers and regulators swarmed the property. Time to document everything before evidence disappeared. Time to understand what he was dealing with before someone else controlled the story. He needed a fence, not the wire fence that currently marked his property. Something real. Something that would keep people out while he figured out what was buried underneath. Something that would buy him the weeks or months he'd need to uncover the truth. The next morning, Marcus called Jensen Fence and Steel. Company out of the next county, far enough away they wouldn't ask questions. "I need privacy fence," he said, 12 feet high, steel panels, full perimeter. The man on the phone whistled. "That's serious fencing. What are you securing?" "My property. That's going to run you 80, 90,000, depending on gates." Marcus thought about his savings. 120,000, accumulated over 40 years of careful living. This would take most of it. "How fast can you do it?" "You want it done fast. It'll cost more." "How fast?" 10 days if we start Monday." "Do it." He hung up before he could change his mind. That weekend, Marcus worked alone, preparing. He took soil samples from 8 more locations around the property, following what he thought might be the pipe's path. Each excavation revealed the same thing. Pipe, old but maintained, running straight as a surveyor's line from northeast to southwest. At one location, he found a junction. Concrete vault buried 6 feet down, big enough to stand in. 3 pipes met there, joining into one larger conduit. The concrete was old, but the access panel had been opened recently. Fresh scrape marks on the bolts. Someone had been down there within the last few years, maintaining the system, keeping it operational. Marcus photographed everything, took samples, mapped it all in his notebook with the precision of a combat engineer. Because that's what this was becoming. Combat, not with guns, but with evidence. Not on a battlefield, but on his own land. Sunday evening, he sat on his porch watching the sun go down. Tomorrow, the fence company would arrive. Tomorrow, his farm would change from open land to fortified position. Tomorrow, the world would notice something was happening on Marcus Wade's property. He thought about calling someone, a lawyer maybe, or a reporter, someone who could help. But he didn't trust lawyers. And reporters asked questions that invited attention he wasn't ready for. No, this was his fight, his land, his truth to uncover. Duke lay beside his chair, gray muzzle resting on crossed paws. Marcus reached down, scratched behind the dog's ears. Just you and me, boy. Like always. The dog's tail thumped once against the porch boards. In the southeast corner of the property, the excavation site sat open to the night sky. Soil piled beside the hole, pipe exposed, evidence waiting to be buried again or brought fully into the light. Marcus didn't know which would happen, but he knew this. Whatever came next, he wouldn't face it blind. Wouldn't let them bury the truth the way they'd buried that pipe 40 years ago. Wouldn't stay silent the way Walt Hendricks had stayed silent. The way Harold Chen's lawsuit had been silenced. The fence would go up, the investigation would continue, and somewhere in Des Moines, Robert Lawrence and his clients would realize that Marcus Wade wasn't going to cooperate, wasn't going to sell, wasn't going to make this easy. Monday morning, 4:30, Marcus woke to the sound of trucks on the county road. Heavy vehicles, multiple engines. He looked out the window and saw them turning into his driveway. Jensen fence and steel, right on time. The foreman stepped out, clipboard in hand. Big man with a weathered face that had seen 40 years of Iowa summers. "Mr. Wade, we ready to do this?" Marcus pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat. "Yeah," he said. "We're ready." The work began. The fence went up in sections, steel panels rising like a wall against the morning sky. Marcus watched from the porch, coffee cooling in his hand, as 6 men transformed his property into something he barely recognized. The sound of metal on metal rang across the fields, hammers driving posts 8 feet into soil that had been open prairie once, before his grandfather broke it with a plow. By day 3, the perimeter was half complete. From the road, the farm looked like it was being caged or fortified. Neighbors slowed their trucks as they passed, windows down, staring. Nobody stopped, nobody waved. The silence felt deliberate, like a conversation ending when you walked into a room. Gene Patterson showed up on day 4. Marcus was checking the northwest corner when Gene's Ford pulled into the drive, diesel engine rumbling. The old farmer climbed out slow, 70 years of hard work written in the way he moved. He'd farmed the adjacent property since before Marcus was born. They'd helped each other through bad years, loaned equipment, pushed trucks out of ditches. Good neighbors in the way rural people understood the term. Respectful distance, reliable help when needed. Gene stood looking at the fence for a long minute before speaking. "Marcus, what the hell is this?" "Privacy fence." "I can see that. Question is why?" Marcus set down the surveyor's tape he'd been using to check measurements. Duke sat at his feet, watching Gene with careful eyes. "Had some trouble with theft. Insurance recommended it." Gene's face said he didn't believe a word. His mouth said something else. "Theft. Out here. We haven't had theft in this county since the Sanderson boys got caught stripping copper wire back in '09. Marcus said nothing. Gene shifted his weight, arthritic knees probably aching. The silence stretched long enough to hurt. "You pissed someone off, Marcus." "Not that I know of. This about that land dispute with the county, easement thing. No dispute, just being careful." Gene looked at him for a long time. Then he shook his head, climbed back in his truck. Before he closed the door, he said one more thing. 40 years I known you, Marcus. You never been careful. You been steady. There's a difference." The truck pulled away, trailing dust. Marcus watched until it disappeared. Then he went back to checking fence posts, measuring distances, making sure everything was exactly right. Because once the fence was up, there'd be no fixing mistakes. By day 7, the panels formed an unbroken wall 12 feet high, circling the entire property. 3 gates at the access roads, heavy steel with locks that could stop a determined intruder, or at least slow them down long enough for Marcus to notice. The foreman handed over 3 sets of keys. "That'll do what you need." Marcus tested each lock twice. Solid, good. "People gonna ask questions," the foreman said. "Already asking me questions." "What did you tell them?" That I build fences, not stories. Smart man. The foreman looked around at what they'd built. From inside, the world had shrunk. The fence cut off sight lines, trapped sound, changed the way wind moved across the land. From outside, Marcus's farm had become a mystery, a statement no one could quite read. Hope you know what you're doing, the foreman said. Marcus paid him cash from an envelope. The foreman counted it twice, nodded, loaded his crew back into trucks. Within 10 minutes, they were gone, and Marcus stood alone inside his new fortress, Duke pressed against his leg, both of them listening to the sudden quiet. That night, Marcus returned to the excavation sites. He'd marked 9 locations with small flags, red plastic strips that showed where pipe ran underground. Now with the fence up, he could work without worrying about being seen from the road. He dug deeper at Site 3, following the pipe's path. 4 feet down, the soil changed color completely. Gray instead of brown, damp despite weeks of dry weather. The smell hit his nose, chemical sharp, making his eyes water. He scooped samples into mason jars, labeled them, photographed everything with the Polaroid. The flash was too bright in the darkness, leaving purple after images. Duke wouldn't come near. The dog stayed 30 feet back, whining. I know, boy, I don't like it either. But Marcus kept digging, because not knowing was worse than knowing. Because ignorance didn't protect you, it just made you vulnerable. The Army had taught him that. Iraq in '91, watching officers make decisions based on bad intelligence. Watching good men die because someone up the chain hadn't asked the right questions. He wouldn't make that mistake, not on his own land. By midnight, he'd excavated a 10-foot section of pipe. It ran straight as a rifle barrel. No deviation, no natural curves. Engineered. Deliberate. At one point, he found a coupling, 2 sections joined with heavy bolts. The metal there showed less corrosion. When he scraped away grime, he could see manufacturer stamps, fresh stamps, recent work. Someone had been maintaining this system. Not 40 years ago, not 20, recently, maybe last year, maybe last month. Marcus sat in the dirt with that knowledge settling over him like a weight. This wasn't historical contamination. This was ongoing, active, deliberate. He took 12 more photographs, filled 6 more jars, drew detailed sketches in his notebook, measurements and angles, compass bearings, building a case without knowing yet who the case would be against, just knowing he'd need proof. Hard evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. The next morning, Marcus drove to town. First time since the fence went up, he needed supplies. Mason jars, rubber gloves, batteries for the camera, things he couldn't order without raising questions. Milton's Feed and Supply sat on Main Street same as it had for 60 years. Bell over the door jangled when Marcus walked in. The sound used to feel welcoming. Now it felt like an alarm. 3 men stood by the counter, farmers Marcus had known for decades. Conversation stopped when he entered. They looked at him, looked away, looked back. The silence had texture, had weight. Marcus grabbed a cart and moved through the aisles. Behind him, whispers started, not loud enough to hear words, just the sound of his name passing between mouths. Marcus Wade. That fence. Something wrong? Government trouble, maybe? Or worse. He piled supplies in the cart. At the counter, Milton rang him up without meeting his eyes. Milton, who'd sold him seed for 15 years, who'd extended credit through bad harvests, who'd come to Sarah's funeral and stood in the back because he didn't know what to say. That'll be $68.50. Marcus paid cash. Milton made change, set it on the counter instead of handing it over. Small gesture. Huge meaning. Everything all right, Marcus? Fine. That fence. People are talking. Let them talk. Milton's jaw tightened. He was maybe 65, gray hair thin on top, hands thick from a lifetime of manual labor. Good man, honest man, but scared man now. Is there something we should know? Something happening. Marcus picked up his change, looked Milton in the eye. If there was, who would I tell? He walked out. Behind him, the silence broke into urgent conversation. By noon, everyone in town would know Marcus Wade had been to Milton's, had acted strange, had basically confirmed that, yes, something was happening. No, he wasn't saying what. Fine, let them wonder. Wondering was safer than knowing, for now. He stopped at the post office, rented a box under a fake business name, Wade Agricultural Consulting. Then he packaged up 5 soil samples, addressed them to an independent testing lab in Minnesota he had found online. A lab far enough from Iowa that they'd have no connection to local politics, Local money, local pressure. He paid extra for expedited shipping, added a prepaid return envelope, used the fake business name on everything. The postal clerk was new, didn't know him, didn't ask questions, just weighed the packages, took his money, tossed them in the outgoing bin. By the time Marcus got back to the farm, it was early afternoon. A car sat on the county road, gray sedan, same one he'd seen before. It didn't move when he turned into his driveway, just sat there, engine running, occupants invisible behind tinted windows. Marcus drove through the gate, locked it behind him. The car stayed where it was for another 20 minutes. Then it drove away. Message received, message understood. He was being watched. That night, he wrote everything down. Dates, time, observations of the car, Milton's reaction, Jean's visit, the fresh coupling on the pipe, building a timeline, a narrative, a record that existed outside his own memory. Because memory was fallible. Memory could be challenged. But written records, photographs, soil samples with chain of custody, those were harder to dismiss. He thought about Sarah, how she'd gotten sick, how fast it had taken her. 8 months from cough to coffin, the doctors had run every test, checked for every known carcinogen. Nothing. Her lungs had simply failed, cells turning cancerous for no reason medicine could name. But Marcus was starting to understand the reason, starting to see the shape of what had been done to this land, to the water table beneath it, to the people who'd lived here drinking from wells that pulled from contaminated aquifer. Sarah had gardened, grew tomatoes every summer, spent hours with her hands in soil. Soil that sat 8 feet above a pipe carrying industrial waste. Soil that absorbed whatever leaked through corroded joints, whatever seeped upward through clay layers. Marcus remembered her washing vegetables at the kitchen sink, water from their well, water that came from the same ground that pipe drained through. He sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Duke came over, pushed his nose into Marcus's palm. The dog's warmth was real. The dog's loyalty was simple. Everything else felt complicated beyond navigation. The phone rang. Marcus stared at it, let it ring 5 times before picking up. Mr. Wade, Robert Lawrence, have you reconsidered our request? No. Mr. Wade, I need to inform you that we've filed a formal complaint with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. They'll be contacting you directly to schedule an inspection. You no longer have the option of handling this privately. Marcus felt anger rise, hot and immediate. He pushed it down. Anger was useless. Anger made you stupid. That's your right. Mr. Wade, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. My clients are prepared to make a very generous offer for your property. $1.2 million, cash sale, 30-day close, all environmental liability assumed by the buyer. You walk away clean. $1.2 million, more money than Marcus had made in 40 years of farming. Enough to retire, move somewhere warm, forget this ever happened. Who's buying? I told you I can't disclose that. Agri Central Industries. Silence on the line. Long enough to be an answer. Mr. Wade, I'm not at liberty to. Save it. Answers no. Mr. Wade, please understand. If DNR finds contamination and you're designated the responsible party, cleanup costs could be $3, $4, $5 million. You'll lose everything. The farm, your savings, your future. We're offering you a way out. No. Marcus hung up. His hand was shaking. Not from fear, from fury. They thought they could buy him, thought they could wave money at a problem they'd created and make it disappear. Thought farmers were simple enough, desperate enough, scared enough to take cash and look the other way. Maybe some were. Maybe most were. But Marcus Wade had spent 7 years alone in a house that still smelled like his dead wife on quiet mornings. He'd spent 41 years fighting soil and weather and banks and bad luck. He'd been to war, had seen what happened when powerful people made decisions that destroyed the powerless. He wasn't selling. Not for $1.2 million. Not for $10 million. This was his land, and whatever poison ran beneath it, whatever truth had been buried here, he was going to dig it up and drag it into daylight. The DNR inspector called 3 days later. Dale Morrison, regional office. Professional voice, bureaucrat careful. Mr. Wade, I'm scheduling a site inspection for next Tuesday. I'll need access to multiple locations on your property for soil and water sampling. Fine, I'll be there. Mr. Wade, I should tell you, if contamination is confirmed, you may be designated a responsible party under state environmental law. I didn't contaminate my own land. Doesn't matter under the statute. Current property owner is liable regardless of who caused the original contamination. That's insane. That's the law. I'd recommend consulting an attorney. I'll handle it myself. Tuesday morning, Morrison arrived in a white DNR truck, equipment in the back, clipboard under his arm. He was maybe 50, going soft around the middle, eyes that had seen too much bureaucracy and not enough justice. He walked the property with Marcus following, Duke trailing behind both of them. At the southeast corner, Morrison stopped, looked at the soil, knelt down, pressed his fingers into it, stood up and walked 20 feet, repeated the process, came back to where he'd started. This area, I'll need samples from 6 locations, different depths. Marcus watched him work. Morrison was thorough, methodical, took samples at 18 inches, 36 inch, 6 feet, labeled each jar, noted GPS coordinates, filled out chain of custody forms, real scientists doing real work. At the 4th sample site, Morrison paused, held the soil up to his nose, sniffed. His expression changed. How long have you owned this property? 20 years. You know about the drainage system. Learning about it. Morrison looked at him. Really looked, not just the glance people gave when they thought they already knew your story. Mr. Wade, I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen contamination sites all over Iowa. He gestured at the dark soil. This looks bad. How bad? Won't know until the lab results come back, 4 to 6 weeks. But, he paused, off the record, you might want to stop using your well water. I've been drinking that water for 20 years. I know, I'm sorry. Morrison finished his sampling, packed his equipment. At the gate he stopped, window down. Mr. Wade, one more thing. Also off the record, if this is what I think it is, you're going to need help. Legal help. This is bigger than one farmer and one property. You understand what I'm saying? Marcus understood, but he also understood that lawyers cost money he didn't have, and that getting help meant bringing in people he didn't trust. I'll handle it. Morrison shook his head, drove away. Marcus stood by the gate long after the truck disappeared. Then he went back to digging. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus excavated 7 more sites. Each one told the same story. Pipe running northeast to southwest. Old but maintained. Soil contaminated at depth. Water samples showing oily sheen, chemical smell. A system that had been operational for decades and showed signs of recent upkeep. At Site 6, he made a discovery that changed everything. He'd been following what he thought was a single pipe, when his shovel hit concrete. He cleared soil away carefully, revealing the corner of something larger. Kept digging. It took 3 hours to expose it fully. A vault. Concrete, maybe 6 feet square, buried 8 feet down, access panel on top, heavy steel, secured with 4 large bolts. Rust covered everything, but when Marcus chipped it away, he could see the bolts had been turned recently. Bright metal showing beneath the corrosion. His heart hammered. This was it, junction point, where multiple pipes met and joined into one main line. Proof of a design system, an engineered solution to a problem AgriCentral didn't want to solve legally. Marcus set up work lights, climbed down into the hole he dug. The bolts were stiff, but they turned. 1, 2, 3, 4. The access panel lifted away. The smell that rose from inside made him gag. Chemical soup, decades of accumulated waste trapped in concrete darkness. Marcus covered his mouth and nose with his shirt, leaned over the opening. 3 pipes entered the vault from different angles. They joined in the center, feeding into one larger conduit that exited toward his property line. The walls were streaked with residue, black and oily. Sediment covered the bottom, thick as mud. He took photographs until the Polaroid ran out of film. Then he climbed out, sat on the edge of the excavation, breathing hard. Duke lay nearby, wouldn't come close to the vault. Someone had built this, engineered it, poured the concrete, installed the pipes. Someone had known exactly what they were doing. This wasn't an accident, wasn't negligence. This was deliberate disposal of industrial waste onto private land. And someone had maintained it. Those fresh bolts proved it. Within the last year, maybe the last few months, someone had opened this vault, checked the system, confirmed it was still functional. Marcus looked toward the northeast, toward where the pipes originated. 5 miles away, AgriCentral Industries operated a chemical plant that employed 800 people, generated millions in local tax revenue, and apparently had been using his land as a waste dump for 4 decades. That night, the car came back. 2 a.m., Marcus woke to Duke's low growl. He went to the window, looked out. Same gray sedan parked on the county road. Headlights off, just sitting there. Marcus watched for 20 minutes. The car didn't move. Finally, he got dressed, grabbed a flashlight, walked toward the fence. The car's engine started immediately. It drove away before Marcus could get close enough to see the license plate clearly. But he'd seen enough Iowa plates. Rental car sticker in the back window. Professional surveillance, not random teenagers or curious neighbors. They were watching, checking his routine, learning his patterns, waiting for what? Marcus didn't know. But the surveillance felt less like intelligence gathering and more like intimidation. A reminder that he wasn't as alone behind his fence as he thought. The next morning, he found the east gate padlock scratched. Fresh marks, bright metal showing through the painted surface. Someone had tried to pick it. Failed, but tried. The message was clear. The fence could be defeated. His security was an illusion. Marcus bought better locks that afternoon. Hospital-grade deadbolts. Then he installed motion sensor cameras at each gate, cheap ones from a farm supply store, the kind people used to catch poachers. They weren't sophisticated, but they'd capture anyone who approached. That evening, sitting on his porch, Marcus made a decision. The soil samples he'd sent to Minnesota would come back soon. When they did, he'd have scientific proof of contamination. Lab results that couldn't be dismissed as paranoia or speculation. But lab results wouldn't tell him who was responsible, wouldn't prove AgriCentral's involvement. For that, he needed historical records, documentation, paper trail that connected the pipes under his land to the plant 5 miles northeast. He needed to go to the library, the County Historical Society, dig through old records, permits, company filings, build a case brick by brick until the truth had no room left to hide. Sunday morning, he drove to the Cedar County Historical Society. Small building next to the old courthouse, staffed by volunteers, smelling of dust and old paper. The woman at the desk looked up when he entered. "Can I help you?" Looking for records from the 1950s, industrial permits, company filings, anything related to Mid-States Chemical. She pointed toward the back room. Microfiche machine in the corner. Files are organized by decade. Help yourself. Marcus spent 6 hours reading. Old newspapers, grainy photographs, documents that painted a picture of post-war prosperity in chemical production. Mid-States Chemical breaking ground in 56. Grand opening in 57. Expansion in 60. Jobs, progress, growth. The language of success. But buried in the back pages, small articles he had to squint to read. Farmer's complaint dismissed in 79. Environmental concerns raised and rejected in 74. Questions about wastewater disposal answered with vague assurances about approved systems. He found it in a 1979 court filing. Chen versus Mid-States Chemical Corporation. Harold Chen, owner of property at Rural Route 5, Section 12. Alleged contamination from industrial waste disposal. Sought damages. Case dismissed for lack of evidence. Marcus wrote down everything. Names, dates, case numbers. Chen's property was 2 miles east of his own. If the pipe ran through Chen's land and Chen had noticed, had tried to fight, had lost, then Marcus might be the second person to discover this. Might be walking the same path Harold Chen had walked 40 years ago. He found Chen's obituary in the 83 archives. Harold Chen, 52, died unexpectedly. Liver failure. Survived by wife Margaret, daughter Rose, 2 grandchildren. Services at First Methodist. 52 years old. Liver failure, 2 years after losing his lawsuit. Marcus sat back from the microfiche machine. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Outside, Sunday afternoon traffic moved past on Main Street. Normal people doing normal things. And here he sat, reading about a dead farmer who tried to expose the same thing Marcus was uncovering now. He wondered what happened to scare Chen into silence, or if Chen had been silenced permanently. Liver failure at 52, it happened, but it also happened to people who'd been exposed to industrial chemicals for decades. Marcus printed out what he could, paid the volunteer, drove home as the sun set. Inside the fence, inside his fortress, he spread the documents on his kitchen table, added them to his growing collection. Photographs, soil samples, now historical records. The pattern was undeniable. The pipe system had existed since the 50s. Chen had discovered it in the 70s. Tried to fight, lost, died. The system continued operating. Marcus bought contaminated land without knowing. 20 years later, he was finding the same evidence Chen had found. His phone rang. Unknown number. Marcus hesitated, then answered. Mr. Wade, this is Laura Chen. Marcus said nothing. Waited. I'm Harold Chen's granddaughter. I'm a reporter with the Des Moines Register. I'd like to talk to you about what's happening on your property. How did you get my number? Public record. I've been researching Agri Central for 2 years. Then I heard about your fence, about DNR inspection, about you asking questions at the Historical Society. My editor thinks I'm crazy, but I think you found what my grandfather found 40 years ago. Marcus looked at the document spread before him. Harold Chen versus Mid-States Chemical. Case dismissed. Plaintiff dead 4 years later. Your grandfather lost his case. I know, but you don't have to lose yours. I have resources. I have evidence he didn't have. And I have a newspaper that will print the truth if the story's solid enough. Why should I trust you? Because we both want the same thing. Because you're in danger and you know it. Because my grandfather died trying to do what you're doing now, and I won't let that happen again. Marcus sat in silence. Outside, night had fallen. The fence made his property invisible from the road. But invisible didn't mean safe, it just meant alone. I need to think about it. Don't think too long, Mr. Wade. Whatever they did to my grandfather, they'll do to you. Unless we get the truth out first. She gave him her number. He wrote it down. Hung up. Sat staring at the phone. Duke came over, rested his head on Marcus's knee. The dog's eyes were brown and simple and trusting. What do I do, boy? The dog had no answer. Nobody did. This was Marcus's choice. Stay silent, take the money, walk away. Or trust a reporter he'd never met, expose a corporation with unlimited resources, and hope the truth was enough to protect him. Outside, somewhere in the darkness beyond the fence, the gray sedan probably waited. Watching. Recording. Reporting back to whoever had sent it. Marcus stood up, walked to the window, looked out at his land, his fence, his prison or fortress, depending on how you saw it. He made his decision. Tomorrow he'd call Laura Chen. Tomorrow he'd start building a case not just for himself, but for Harold Chen's memory, for Sarah's unexplained cancer, for every person who'd lived on contaminated land and never known why their bodies failed them. Tomorrow the fight would become real. But tonight, for a few more hours, Marcus Wade sat alone in his house with his awe and his evidence and the weight of choices that couldn't be taken back. The fence stood tall in the darkness, solid, unyielding, marking the boundary between what had been and what was coming. And inside that boundary, a man prepared for war. Laura Chen arrived on a Tuesday morning when frost still silver-coated the fields. Marcus watched her car turn into his driveway, a gray Honda Civic that had seen better years. She parked outside the gate, got out slowly, looked up at the 12-foot fence like she was measuring its meaning. Marcus walked to the gate with Duke at his side. Through the steel mesh, he could see her clearly. Mid-30s maybe, dark hair pulled back, carrying a leather messenger bag that looked expensive against her thrift store jacket. She had her grandfather's eyes. Marcus had seen them in the microfiche photographs at the Historical Society. Harold Chen staring at a camera in 1979, holding up soil samples, believing truth mattered. Mr. Wade, Ms. Chen. They stood on opposite sides of the fence. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them. Can I come in? Marcus unlocked the gate. She stepped through and he locked it behind her. The click of metal on metal seemed louder than it should. Thank you for seeing me. Haven't decided if I'm seeing you yet. Just listening. She smiled at that, small knowing, respectful of his caution. They walked to the house. Inside, Marcus made coffee without asking if she wanted any. Old habit. Sarah used to say he made coffee for ghosts, always brewing a full pot even when he was alone. Laura sat at the kitchen table where Marcus had spread his evidence the night before. He'd put most of it away, but some remained. Photographs, soil sample jars, his notebook open to a page of measurements and observations. She looked but didn't touch. Good instincts. Marcus set a mug in front of her. Black. She wrapped both hands around it like she needed the warmth. My grandfather died when I was 3. I don't remember him. But my mother, she never let me forget what happened to him. How he found contamination on his land. How he tried to fight Mid-States Chemical. How they buried him in legal fees and technicalities until he had to walk away. Then 4 years later, liver failure at 52. Marcus sat down across from her, waited. She was 10 when he died. She remembers the funeral, remembers her grandmother crying, not sad crying, but angry crying. Remembers her grandmother saying they killed him and nobody cared. For years, I thought she meant cancer, liver cancer. Then I became a reporter, started digging into Agri-Central's history, found the lawsuit, found the dismissal, found the pattern. What pattern? Laura pulled a folder from her bag, laid out photocopies, news clippings, court documents. 3 farmers between 1974 and 1992. All sued Mid-States or its successor companies. All claimed contamination. All lost or settled with non-disclosure agreements. 2 are dead. Cancer, liver failure. The third moved to Arizona, won't talk to me, sounds terrified on the phone. She pushed the papers toward Marcus. Your land sits downstream from all of theirs. If the system is what I think it is, you're the endpoint, where 40 years of industrial waste finally stopped moving and started accumulating. Marcus looked at the documents, names he didn't recognize, cases he'd never heard of. But the pattern Laura described matched what he'd found, a system designed to move waste away from the plant, through private farmland, to a final settling point where nobody would look. His land, his water, Sarah's garden. I sent soil samples to a lab in Minnesota. Results should come back this week. I know a better lab. University of Iowa. Professor there, James Wu, he's been trying to prove Agri-Central contamination for 10 years. Can't get access to properties. But if you let him test your soil, why should I trust a professor? Because he testified in my grandfather's case. As a graduate student, the judge wouldn't allow his testimony, ruled it speculative. Wu spent 20 years trying to prove he was right. This is personal for him too. Marcus drank coffee, thought about trust, how it had to start somewhere or you ended up alone behind a fence waiting for enemies you couldn't name. All right, but I keep copies of everything. Chain of custody stays with me. Agreed. And if this goes public, I control the timing. Laura hesitated, then nodded. I can't promise my editor won't push for early publication, but I'll fight for you to be ready first. Good enough. They spent the next 3 hours going through everything Marcus had found. Laura photographed his photographs, took notes on his excavations, mapped the pipe system against property records she'd brought. She worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. At the concrete vault, she stopped, stared at Marcus's photos of the junction point, the fresh bolts, the maintenance evidence. This is it. This proves ongoing contamination, not historical, active. They can't claim ignorance with this. Can they claim it's not theirs? We trace the pipes, ground-penetrating radar if we have to, follow them all the way back to the plant. Get Professor Wu involved. He has equipment, connections. And when Agri-Central figures out what we're doing, Laura looked at the fence surrounding them. I think they already know. That afternoon, Marcus called the Minnesota lab. Results were in. The technician's voice carried careful neutrality, the tone of someone delivering bad news wrapped in professional language. Mr. Wade, your samples show heavy metal contamination significantly above EPA action levels. Cadmium, lead, chromium, also volatile organic compounds. Trichloroethylene at 180 times the safe limit. This is consistent with industrial chemical waste, not agricultural runoff. How old? Soil stratification analysis suggests contamination accumulation over multiple decades. 40 to 50 years minimum. Can you tell if it's ongoing? The concentration levels and compound stability suggest either massive historical dumping or continued input. Without temporal sampling, we can't be certain, but the technician paused. Off the record, Mr. Wade, this is active contamination. I'd recommend you stop using any groundwater from that property immediately. I've been drinking that water for 20 years. I'm sorry. We're required to report findings this severe to state EPA. You should expect contact from regulators. Marcus thanked him and hung up. Laura had been listening. They'll try to designate you the responsible party, make you liable for cleanup. It's their standard play. I didn't contaminate my own land. Doesn't matter. Iowa law makes the current property owner liable regardless of who caused the original contamination. They'll offer to buy the property, assume the liability, make you sign an NDA. Then they'll do the minimum cleanup required and bury the whole thing. Not happening. Then you need to be ready. Legal bills, pressure, isolation. They'll come at you from every direction. Already started. Marcus told her about the surveillance car, the attempted lockpicking, the phone calls from his bank, his insurance company. Laura nodded like she'd heard it all before. They did the same thing to the farmer in '92, Carl Morrison, Started with financial pressure. His equipment loan got called early. Insurance canceled. Property reassessed at triple the tax rate. Within 6 months, he was bankrupt. Sold to a development company that turned out to be an Agri-Central subsidiary. He lost everything. Everything. That's why he won't talk. He signed a settlement that probably prevents him from even thinking about it too loud. Marcus stood and walked to the window. Outside, his land stretched away under gray November sky. This was supposed to be the quiet season. Time to maintain equipment, plan for spring, rest. Instead, he was preparing for a fight he never wanted against an enemy with unlimited resources. I need to see the plant, see where the pipes originate. You can't just drive onto Agri-Central property. I know, but there's public land adjacent, county conservation area. I want to see the facility, get photographs, establish sight lines. When? Tomorrow, before they know we're working together. Laura pulled out her phone, typed notes. I'll bring Professor Wu. He can use thermal imaging, identify possible discharge points, build a technical case. Just don't tell him where until we're on the way. Don't tell anyone. She looked up from her phone, met his eyes. You really think they're listening? I think they've been getting away with this for 40 years. They didn't manage that by being careless. The next morning, Marcus met Laura and Professor Wu at a gas station 10 miles from the farm. Wu was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 40, wearing field gear that looked like it had actually been in fields. He shook Marcus's hand with the grip of someone who understood manual labor. Mr. Wade, I've waited a long time for this. Hope it's worth the wait. They drove in Marcus's truck, Laura navigating, Wu in the back with equipment cases. The route took them past farmland similar to Marcus's. Rolling fields, scattered houses, the geometry of rural Iowa. But as they approached the conservation area, the landscape changed. Fewer farms, more industrial buildings. The Agri-Central plant rising against the horizon like a small city. Marcus parked where the conservation trail met County Road. From here, you could see the plant's western perimeter. Fencing, buildings, storage tanks. Security was visible even at this distance. Cameras, patrol vehicles, the infrastructure of a facility that valued privacy. Wu set up his equipment on a small rise. Thermal camera, GPS unit, laser rangefinder. He worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times in many places. Interesting. What? See that building? Northwestern corner. That's where their waste processing should be. But the thermal signature is wrong. Cooler than it should be if they're actively treating wastewater. Maybe they upgraded. Better insulation. Maybe. Or maybe they're not processing on site anymore. Maybe they're sending it somewhere else. He swung the camera south, following sightlines, thermal gradients. There. See that? Small thermal variance, ground level along their southern fence line. Could be nothing. Could be an outflow point. Wu photographed everything. Took measurements. Recorded GPS coordinates. Meanwhile, Laura used a long lens camera, documenting the facility's layout, the buildings, the lack of visible treatment infrastructure. Marcus stood watch, binoculars scanning for security patrols. Nothing yet. But they'd been here 20 minutes. Time was running short. We should go. Wu packed up reluctantly, still staring at his thermal readouts like they were treasure maps. Mr. Wade, with your permission, I'd like to bring ground-penetrating radar to your property, map the entire pipe system, prove conclusively where it originates and terminates. Do it, but quietly. Quietly. Wu smiled. That's all I've ever been allowed to do. They drove back in silence. Marcus dropped them at the gas station, watched them drive away in Laura's Honda. Then he sat in his truck, engine off, thinking about what Wu had found. Thermal variance at the plant's southern perimeter. Same direction the pipes ran from Marcus's land. The system was still active, still moving waste, still contaminating. His phone rang. Unknown number. Marcus answered, expecting lawyers or regulators. Mr. Wade, my name is Dale Morrison. I'm the DNR inspector who sampled your property. I remember. I got the lab results this morning. Mr. Wade, this is bad. Worse than I thought, the contamination levels. He paused. I'm required to designate your property a hazardous waste site. EPA will be notified. You'll receive official notification within 48 hours. What does that mean? It means your property is now under state and federal jurisdiction. Access will be restricted, further testing required, and... Morrison's voice dropped. You need to know, Agri-Central's lawyers already contacted my supervisor. They're claiming they had no knowledge of any historical contamination. They're suggesting you might have dumped waste yourself. That's insane. I know. But they have lawyers and you don't. They have documentation and you. What do you have, Mr. Wade? Evidence, photographs, historical records. Get more, get it fast, because they're going to bury you in paperwork and legal motions and expert testimony that contradicts everything you've found. I've seen it before. They're very good at this. You telling me to give up? I'm telling you to fight smart. Find allies, build an airtight case, and do it before they control the narrative completely. Morrison hung up. Marcus sat holding a dead phone, staring through the windshield at Iowa farmland that suddenly looked different, contaminated, poisoned, turned into evidence in a case he hadn't chosen to fight. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked the fence line with Duke, flashlight cutting through darkness, checking locks, looking for signs of intrusion. The motion cameras he'd installed showed nothing. No cars on the road, no movement near the gates, just silence and November wind. At 2 a.m., headlights appeared on the county road, the gray sedan back again. It slowed as it passed his property, stopped, sat there with engine running for 10 minutes, then drove away. Marcus photographed it with his phone, zoomed in on the license plate, ran it through an online database. Rental car from Des Moines, rented to a corporate account. Company name redacted. He forwarded the photo to Laura. She responded within minutes, like she'd been awake too. I'll trace it. Be careful. That was Wednesday. Thursday morning, a different car appeared. Black SUV, tinted windows, sitting in the same spot. Marcus documented it. Laura traced it. Same rental company, different corporate account. They were sending a message. We're watching. We know your routines. We can reach you whenever we want. Friday, the pressure shifted. Marcus's bank called. First National, where he'd done business for 20 years. Mr. Wade, we've received information suggesting environmental liability concerns with your property. We're requesting an updated environmental assessment before we can approve your spring operating loan. I've farmed that land for 20 years, never missed a payment. We understand, but this is a risk management issue. New information has come to light. What information? From who? We're not at liberty to disclose the source, but we need that assessment within 30 days or we'll have to decline the loan. Marcus hung up, checked his accounts. Without the spring operating loan, he couldn't buy seed, fertilizer, fuel, couldn't plant, couldn't farm. One phone call and they'd crippled his ability to make a living. An hour later, his insurance company called. Farm liability policy canceled effective 30 days. Environmental risk exclusion. No appeal. By noon, his property insurance also canceled. Same reason. Marcus sat at his kitchen table watching his financial foundation crumble. Everything he'd built, every safety net, every backup plan, gone. And the people doing it didn't even have to show their faces. Just phone calls from faceless institutions suddenly concerned about risks they'd ignored for 2 decades. Laura called that evening. They're boxing you in. Classic strategy. Make it financially impossible to fight. I noticed. How much savings do you have? Enough for 6 months, maybe 8 if I'm careful. You'll need a lawyer, environmental litigation specialist. They're expensive. I'll represent myself. Marcus, that's suicide. These are billion-dollar corporations with legal teams that specialize in burying people like you. I learned fast. Not fast enough. Please, let me help you find someone. No lawyers. Not yet. First, we build the case they can't fight. Then we bring in lawyers to deliver it. Laura sighed. The sound carried frustration and worry in something like admiration. You're stubborn, steady. There's a difference. That weekend, Professor Wu came to the farm with his ground-penetrating radar. They worked for 2 days mapping the pipe system in detail. Wu moved the equipment in careful grids, recording data, building a 3-dimensional model of what lay beneath Marcus's fields. Sunday evening, Wu showed him the results on a laptop screen. The pipes formed a network, multiple branches feeding into junction points, everything flowing toward the southwest corner of Marcus's property. And from there, continuing south toward what had been Harold Chen's land. It's a disposal system, engineered and deliberate, probably installed in the late 50s when environmental regulations were basically non-existent. They've maintained it ever since. Wu zoomed in on a section. See this? That's a valve. And there, another one. That's not historical infrastructure. Those are modern components, probably installed within the last 5 years. Can you prove that? I can prove the pipe composition changes at those points. Old cast iron to new PVC. I can prove the thermal signature differs. But to prove when it was installed, we'd need to excavate. Marcus thought about that, thought about what excavating modern sections would mean. Undeniable proof of recent activity. Evidence that destroyed any claim of historical ignorance. Do it, I'll show you where. They spent Monday digging. Marcus with his entrenching tool, Wu with proper archaeological equipment, taking measurements, documenting everything. 3 feet down, they found it. PVC pipe section. Bright white against the old cast iron it connected to. The coupling was stainless steel, no corrosion, fresh. Wu held up a section they'd carefully removed. Check the manufacturer's stamp. This pipe was made in 2018, 7 years ago. The coupling. He examined it closely. Less than 3 years old based on the casting marks. He photographed it from every angle, documented the serial numbers, took samples of the coupling material for analysis. This is smoking gun evidence, Mr. Wade. They can't claim this is historical. They can't claim ignorance. Someone from AgriCentral or a contractor working for them installed this within the last 3 years. Marcus stared at the white pipe gleaming in the November sun. Proof. Real, physical, undeniable proof. That night, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, photographs. Marcus recognized them immediately. Photos of him at the Historical Society, at the gas station meeting Laura, at the conservation area overlooking AgriCentral's plant. Surveillance photos taken from a distance with a long lens. And underneath the photos, a single typed note. You're making a mistake. Last chance. 1.2 million. 30-day close. Or face the consequences. No signature. No company name. Just the threat hanging in white space. Marcus called Laura, told her about the package. They're escalating. That's intimidation, possibly illegal depending on how you interpret it. You should file a police report. To who? Sheriff Morrison, who told me to keep things quiet because he has an election coming. Then to the state police, or FBI if this crosses into federal intimidation. It won't do any good. They'll deny it. Say the photos are public observation. The note is just a business offer. Marcus, this is serious. They're threatening you. I've been threatened before. Iraq, 91. This is cleaner at least. Nobody's shooting. That's not funny. Not trying to be funny. Just saying I've dealt with worse. But in Iraq you had backup. Unit support. Here you're alone. Marcus looked at Duke sleeping in the corner. Looked at the fence outside his window. Alone, so? Yes, that was the truth of it. Alone behind walls he'd built himself, fighting enemies he couldn't see, holding evidence nobody wanted revealed. I need to go public. Soon, before they shut me down completely. Give me 3 more days. I'm working on the article. Need to confirm some sources. And I want Professor Wu's analysis finalized. We go public with everything at once. Scientific proof, historical pattern, current evidence. Too much for them to deny. 3 days. 3 days. Then we burn it all down. Marcus hung up. 3 days. He could hold out 3 days. Probably. Tuesday morning, his storage barn caught fire. Marcus was in the house when he heard the smoke alarm. By the time he got outside, flames had engulfed the east wall. He called 911, grabbed a fire extinguisher, but it was already too late. The barn held old equipment, stored chemicals, 30 years of accumulated farming supplies. The volunteer fire department arrived within 15 minutes. By then, the barn was fully involved. They saved the structure from total collapse, but everything inside was destroyed. $200,000 in equipment and supplies. Gone. Fire marshal showed up an hour later, walked through the smoking wreckage, taking photos, making notes. Any idea how it started? Marcus showed him the electrical panel. Rewired 3 years ago, everything to code. The marshal examined it, frowned. This doesn't look like electrical failure. See here. The burn pattern suggests accelerant. And this, he pointed to a broken window. Entry point, maybe. You saying arson. I'm saying the investigation is ongoing. I'll need to bring in a specialist. The marshal left. Marcus stood in the ruins of his barn, breathing smoke, feeling rage rise hot enough to burn. They'd crossed a line, from intimidation to property destruction, from threats to action. He called Laura. It started. They just burned my equipment barn. Oh God, Marcus, you need to get out of there. This is too dangerous. No, this proves I'm close. Proves they're scared. We go public now. We're not ready. Need 1 more day to verify. Then verify faster. Because in 1 more day, I might not have a house to stand in. Laura was quiet. Then her voice came back, harder, determined. Tonight, I'll have the article ready tonight. Professor Wu's sending his analysis in an hour. We publish tomorrow morning, front page, above the fold. Everything we have. Good. Marcus, be careful. Please lock your doors. Stay inside. I'm past careful. I'm at steady now. He spent that afternoon documenting the fire damage, photographing everything, the broken window, the burn patterns, the timing coming right after he'd excavated the modern pipe section, too convenient to be coincidence. That evening, he sat on his porch with a shotgun across his lap. Legal to carry on your own property. Duke beside him, ears alert, watching the road. No cars came, no movement beyond the fence, just November darkness and the smell of smoke from the burned barn. Marcus thought about giving up, thought about taking the 1.2 million and walking away, starting over somewhere else, somewhere clean. Then he thought about Sarah, her garden, her hands in contaminated soil, her lungs filling with cells that shouldn't exist. Her last words in the hospital, promise me you'll be all right. He hadn't promised, couldn't promise, because being all right wasn't something you promised. It was something you fought for. At midnight, his phone buzzed, a text from Laura. Article is done, Woof's analysis attached. Publishing in 4 hours. Get ready. This changes everything. Marcus read the text twice. 4 hours until the truth went public. 4 hours until AgriCentral's secret became front page news. 4 hours until his fight became everyone's fight. He stood up. Duke stood with him. Together, they walked the fence line one more time, checking locks, looking for threats. The motion cameras showed nothing. The road stayed empty. Just a farmer and his dog in the darkness, waiting for dawn. But this dawn would be different. This dawn would bring exposure. Light on things meant to stay buried. Truth that had been hidden for 40 years. Marcus didn't sleep, just waited, watching the eastern horizon for the first hint of sun, knowing that when it rose, nothing would ever be the same again. 4 hours, then the war truly began. The Des Moines Register hit doorsteps at 5:30 a.m. Marcus didn't sleep that night, just waited in his kitchen with coffee going cold in the same chipped mug, watching darkness thin to gray through the window. His phone sat on the table in front of him, screen dark, waiting. At 5:45 it rang. Laura. It's out? Front page, above the fold. Headline reads, 40 years of poison. How AgriCentral contaminated Iowa farmland. Marcus said nothing. Just listened to her breathing on the other end. Your name is in it, your property, everything we found. Professor Wu's analysis, the pipe system, the modern components, all of it. Her voice carried something between triumph and fear. This is going to explode, Marcus. National news by tonight. EPA will have to respond. AgriCentral's stock is going to tank. You just declared war on a billion-dollar corporation. Good, Marcus. Be ready. They're going to come after you with everything they have. Let them come. He hung up, sat in the silence that followed. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were reading his story over breakfast. Reading about contaminated land, corporate negligence, a farmer who refused to stay silent, his private fight becoming public knowledge, his isolation ending, for better or worse. Duke whined at the door. Marcus let him out, watched the dog patrol the fence line in the early light. Routine, familiar. Soon nothing would be routine again. By 7 a.m., his phone started ringing. Reporters from Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, even Chicago. He didn't answer. Let them go to voicemail. 15 messages in an hour, 20, 30. At 8, the first TV truck arrived. Local news from Des Moines. Camera crew setting up outside his gate. Reporter doing stand-ups with the fence as backdrop. Marcus watched from the window. Within an hour, 3 more trucks joined them. By noon, there were 7. The county road had become a media circus. Reporters camping outside his property, interviewing each other when they couldn't get to him. His fence, built for privacy, had become the most photographed agricultural structure in Iowa. His phone rang. Number he recognized. Gene Patterson. Marcus, what in the hell did you do? Told the truth. The truth. Gene's voice was tight, angry. You just destroyed this county. AgriCentral employs 800 people here. My nephew works there. My neighbor's daughter. You think they're going to thank you for this? I think they deserve to know what they've been breathing. What you've done, it's... Gene stopped. Started again. People are scared, Marcus. Scared of losing jobs. Scared of property values tanking. Scared their land might be contaminated too. You opened a door that can't be closed. It was already open. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Jean hung up. Marcus set the phone down. Looked at Duke lying in the corner, unconcerned with phone calls and reporters in the collapse of social order. The dog had simple needs: food, water, loyalty. Maybe dogs had it right. By afternoon, the pressure went from noise to structure. A process server appeared at the gate, delivered papers through the fence. Marcus opened the envelope standing right there, reading while the server watched. Agri Central Industries versus Marcus Wade. Defamation, $25 million in damages. Immediate injunction requested to prevent further public statements. Court date set for 3 weeks out. The server shifted his weight, uncomfortable. You're supposed to sign acknowledging receipt. Marcus signed, handed it back. The server left quickly, like contamination might be contagious. An hour later, another server, this time from Lawrence and Cole, restraining order hearing. AgriCentral claiming Marcus's statements constituted harassment and business interference. They wanted a court order preventing him from speaking to media, posting online, or making any further allegations. Marcus read it twice. They were trying to silence him legally, using the courts as a gag. Defamation suit to threaten him financially. Restraining order to shut him up immediately. He called Laura. They just served me. Defamation and restraining order. I know. They served the register too. $20 million libel suit. They're trying to kill the story through litigation. Will your paper back down? No. Our lawyers say the article is solid. We have evidence, multiple sources, expert analysis. But Marcus, she paused. You don't have a newspaper's legal team. 25 million, that could destroy you even if you win. I'll represent myself. That's insane. We've established that. Doesn't change the math. I can't afford lawyers that can fight AgriCentral. So I fight without lawyers. There are environmental law groups, nonprofits that take cases like this. And how long does it take them to mobilize? Weeks, months. I've got 3 weeks until court. Laura was quiet. Then she said something that surprised him. My grandfather had the same choice. Fight alone or wait for help that might never come. He waited. It cost him everything. I remember. Don't make his mistake. Let me find you help. You do that. Meanwhile, I'll prepare like I'm going in alone. After he hung up, Marcus pulled out every document he had. Photographs, soil samples, lab reports, Professor Wu's analysis, historical records. He spread them across the kitchen table, the living room floor, organized them chronologically, thematically, by evidence type, building a case the way the Army had trained him to plan operations. Objective, assets, timeline, contingencies. His objective was simple. Prove AgriCentral knowingly contaminated his land for 40 years. Prove they maintained the system recently. Prove they knew and concealed the damage. His assets were evidence, expert testimony from Wu, historical pattern from the Chen case. Not much against a corporation's legal army, but it was what he had. The phone rang, unknown number. Marcus almost didn't answer, then something made him pick up. Mr. Wade, this is Thomas Brooks. I'm a special agent with the EPA Criminal Investigation Division. Marcus sat down. I read this morning's article. I've been reviewing historical files on AgriCentral for 6 months now. Different case, but this. What you've found connects to things we've been investigating. I'd like to come see your property, today if possible. Today's fine. Brooks arrived at 4 p.m. in an unmarked government sedan. He was maybe 45, looked like he'd been a Marine once, had that bearing. He showed credentials through the fence. Marcus let him in. They walked the property in fading afternoon light. Marcus showed him everything. The excavation sites, the concrete vault, the modern PVC section. Brooks took his own photographs, made notes, asked technical questions that proved he understood what he was looking at. At the vault, Brooks knelt down, examining the fresh bolt marks. This is ongoing contamination. Recent maintenance. He looked up at Marcus. You understand what this means? Means they're still doing it. Means this is a criminal case, not just civil. Knowing violation of environmental law, conspiracy to conceal, potentially fraud. I can open a federal investigation. Get warrants, access their facility, their records. How long? Weeks, maybe months. Federal cases move slow. I've got 3 weeks until they try to bankrupt me in court. Brooks stood up, brushed dirt from his knees. Mr. Wade, I can't give you legal advice. But I can tell you this. The evidence you've gathered is the most comprehensive documentation of illegal dumping I've seen in 20 years. You've done 90% of my job for me. If you can hold out until the federal case develops, this could be the biggest environmental prosecution in Midwest history. And if I can't hold out, then AgriCentral buries you, buries this case, and keeps poisoning land for another 40 years. No pressure then. Brooks almost smiled. Almost. I'll move as fast as I can. Meanwhile, don't destroy any evidence. Don't let anyone on your property without a warrant. And Mr. Wade, he paused at the gate, watch your back. Companies that operate like this, they don't stop at lawsuits. I noticed. After Brooks left, Marcus stood by the fence watching the media trucks pack up for the evening. They'd be back tomorrow, and the day after. His story had momentum now, velocity. Whether that momentum carried him toward justice or destruction, he didn't know yet. That night, the phone calls started. Not reporters this time, neighbors, people he'd known for years. First was Tom Bradley, farmer 3 miles west. Marcus, my property. You think it could be contaminated too? Possible. If the pipe system extends that far, Jesus, my kids played in those fields. My grandkids. How do I what? Do? Get your soil tested, independent lab. Don't use local companies. They might have AgriCentral connections. Tom's voice cracked. I can't afford that. Testing lawyers if it's bad, I'm barely holding on as it is. I'll send you the lab information I used. Tell them I referred you. Maybe they'll give you a discount. After Tom came 3 more calls. Farmers asking questions, scared questions, angry questions. One woman cried on the phone. Her husband had died of liver cancer 5 years ago. 53 years old. She wanted to know if it was the land, if the farm had killed him. Marcus told her the truth. He didn't know. Maybe. Probably. Get tested. Each call was a weight added to what he already carried. This wasn't just about his land anymore. It was about everyone downstream. Everyone who trusted their soil, their water, their government to protect them. By midnight, he'd taken 16 calls. By morning, the number would be hundreds. People he couldn't help, questions he couldn't answer, pain he couldn't fix. Wednesday, the counterattack went from legal to personal. Marcus's truck wouldn't start. He checked under the hood, found the battery cables cut clean through. Vandalism, but professional. No damage visible unless you looked. He called the sheriff. Morrison came out, took a report, looked uncomfortable. Marcus, I got to be honest. A lot of people in this county are angry. 800 jobs at AgriCentral. If the plant shuts down, he didn't finish. So you're saying I did this to myself. I'm saying I can't protect you from 800 angry people and their families. Best I can do is increase patrols, but my department is 4 deputies covering 200 square miles. Understood. After Morrison left, Marcus walked the fence line, found 3 new spots where someone had tested the structure. Scratch marks on locks, boot prints in soft ground near the west gate, a section of fence that had been climbed, leaving scuff marks on the steel. They were probing, learning his defenses, planning. He installed more cameras, bought motion sensor lights for the perimeter, started sleeping in shifts, 4 hours at a time, never deep enough to miss sounds of intrusion. Thursday brought the town meeting. Mayor called it. Mandatory attendance encouraged. Marcus didn't go, but Laura did, texted him updates throughout. Standing room only, maybe 500 people. Mayor trying to keep it civil. Lot of anger. People shouting about boss. About property values. Your name came up approximately 100 times. None of it good. Then one woman stood up, said her sister died of cancer. Said maybe Marcus did the right thing. Got shouted down, almost started a fight. Town split, maybe 60-40 against you, but that 40%, they're getting louder. That evening, Marcus sat on his porch watching the sunset. Orange and red bleeding across November sky. Beautiful and indifferent. The land didn't care about lawsuits or town meetings. The land just was, poisoned or clean. It just was. His phone buzzed. Email from a law firm in Chicago. Environmental litigation specialist. Laura must have contacted them. Mr. Wade, we've reviewed your case. We're prepared to represent you pro bono. Our firm has successfully litigated against major polluters, including 3 cases against AgriCentral. We believe your evidence is compelling and winnable. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Pro bono. Free representation. From a firm that had beaten AgriCentral before. Marcus stared at the email for a long time. Pride said no. Said he could handle this himself. Didn't need anyone's charity. But survival said yes. Said only a fool turned down expert help when fighting a war. He called the number. Spoke to a lawyer named Patricia Moreno. Sharp voice, direct questions, no wasted time. She listened to his story, asked about evidence, timeline, current litigation. Mr. Wade, you've built a better case than most of my clients who've spent years in discovery. Your documentation is exceptional. The modern pipe components, that's the kind of evidence that destroys corporate defenses. I'd like to fly out tomorrow, review everything in person. All right. And Mr. Wade, stop talking to reporters. Stop posting anything online. Let me handle all the public statements from now on. Anything you say can be used against you in the defamation case. I haven't been talking to reporters. Good. Keep it that way. From now on, all communication goes through me. Patricia Moreno arrived Friday afternoon in a rental car, carrying 2 briefcases in the confidence of someone who'd fought these battles before. She was maybe 50, gray streaking through dark hair, wearing a suit that had seen courtrooms in multiple states. They sat at Marcus's kitchen table. She went through every piece of evidence, asking questions, taking notes, photographing documents. 4 hours of detailed review. Finally, she sat back. This is winnable. Not easy, but winnable. The modern pipe components kill their historical contamination defense. Professor Wu's thermal imaging places active discharge at their facility. The Chen lawsuit establishes pattern and knowledge. And your documentation. She gestured at the spread of evidence. This is prosecutor quality work. What about the defamation suit? Nuisance litigation. They're hoping to drain your resources and scare you into settlement. We'll file a motion to dismiss, argue truth as absolute defense. The restraining order? Same thing. Prior restraint on truthful speech. Judge will deny it. You sound confident. I've done this 11 times, 1-9. The 2 I lost, the evidence wasn't as strong as what you have here. Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Small and cautious, but present. What do you need from me? Stop doing anything that could be construed as vigilante investigation. No more excavations without proper permits. No more soil sampling. We have enough evidence. Now we preserve it and prepare for trial. When? AgriCentral will try to delay. But with EPA involvement, federal pressure, media attention, I'd estimate 6 months to a year. That's a long time to hold out. I know, but you've made it this far. That night, Marcus slept better than he had in weeks. Not soundly, but better. Having Patricia Moreno on his side changed the mathematics of the fight, changed it from impossible to merely very difficult. Saturday morning brought new problems. Someone spray-painted his fence. Red letters 6 feet high, visible from the road. Traitor, job killer. The paint dripped like blood. Marcus stood staring at it. Duke sniffed the fence, whined. The paint was fresh, still tacky. Overnight work. He called Patricia. She sent photographers, documented it, filed police reports. Evidence of harassment, intimidation, possibly hate crime depending on how you read the statutes. But the paint stayed. Marcus didn't have time or energy to remove it, so it stayed, visible to every media truck, every passing car. Physical manifestation of the community's anger. Sunday, the church was interesting. Marcus hadn't attended since Sarah died, couldn't stomach the hymns and platitudes about God's plan. But this Sunday he went, sat in the back pew, arrived late, planned to leave early. The sermon was about forgiveness, about letting go of grudges, about community healing. The pastor didn't mention Marcus by name, but everyone knew. You could feel eyes on him, hear whispers like wind through wheat. After the service, as Marcus headed for the door, old Bill Henderson blocked his path. Bill, who'd farmed adjacent land for 60 years, who'd taught Marcus about soil pH when he was young and stupid. You destroyed this town. I exposed a crime. Same thing. Bill's hands shook. My grandson works at AgriCentral. Good job, benefits, feeding his family. Now he might lose it because you couldn't let the past stay buried. The past was poisoning people. Maybe? Bill's eyes were wet, but the poison was slow. Unemployment is fast. He pushed past Marcus and left. Others followed, avoiding eye contact, leaving Marcus standing alone in the church entryway. A few people nodded to him. Tom Bradley gripped his shoulder, said nothing, but the gesture meant solidarity. A woman whispered thank you as she passed. But most just left, silent, judging. Marcus drove home through November gray. The fence came into view, red paint screaming traitor. And he thought about Bill's words. about slow poison versus fast unemployment, about choices that hurt people no matter which way you made them. That afternoon, Agent Brooks called. Mr. Wade, we executed a warrant on AgriCentral's facility this morning. Seized documents, computer records, maintenance logs. What we're finding, he paused. This is worse than we thought. Internal memos going back to 1974, acknowledging the Hendricks disposal arrangement, calling it cost-effective. Maintenance records showing regular service on the pipe system through last year. They knew. They always knew. Can you prove it? We can prove everything. This is conspiracy, fraud, knowing endangerment. Criminal charges are coming, not just against the company, but specific executives. How long? Grand jury convenes in 3 weeks. Indictments probably 45 to 60 days after that. Marcus felt grim satisfaction. Not joy, just the cold recognition that he'd been right, that the truth he'd uncovered was real and provable and devastating. Thank you for telling me. Mr. Wade, Brooks's voice carried something like respect. What you did, gathering this evidence, refusing to back down. Most people would have taken the money and walked away. You didn't. That takes. He searched for the word, character, or stupidity. Maybe both. Either way, you did the right thing. After Brooks hung up, Marcus sat in the silence of his house. The right thing. He'd done the right thing, and it had cost him his community, his peace, his safety. The fence kept people out, but it also kept him in, isolated, besieged. Duke came over, rested his head on Marcus's knee. The dog's eyes held no judgment, no complexity, just loyalty. What do you think, boy? Was it worth it? Duke's tail thumped once. Marcus chose to interpret that as yes. Monday morning brought national news coverage. CNN, NBC, Fox. The story had grown beyond Iowa, beyond agricultural news. This was David versus Goliath, small farmer against corporate giant, environmental justice against economic pressure. Marcus's fence appeared on television screens across America. The traitor graffiti got more airtime than the actual contamination. Media loved the visual, the conflict, the drama. His phone rang constantly. Interview requests, book deals, documentary filmmakers. Patricia screened everything, declined almost all of it. One request she approved. 60 Minutes wanted a full segment. Investigative piece, multiple sources, deep dive into AgriCentral's history. That could help, she said. National exposure, pressure on the company, makes it harder for them to settle quietly. When? 3 weeks. They want to time it with the federal indictments. Marcus agreed. At this point, might as well go all in. Tuesday evening, Marcus stood by his fence watching the sunset. Orange fading to purple, temperature dropping toward frost. Winter coming, his first winter in this war. A car approached on the county road. Slowed, stopped at his gate. Marcus tensed, hand moving toward the phone in his pocket. The car door opened. A man got out. Older, maybe 70, moving stiff with arthritis or age. He walked to the fence, stopped a few feet back. Marcus Wade, that's me. The man looked at the fence, at the property beyond, at Marcus standing guard like a sentry. My name is Carl Morrison. I farmed 8 miles from here until '92. I sued Mid-States Chemical. Lost. Lost everything. Marcus remembered the name from Laura's research. The farmer who'd gone bankrupt, sold out, disappeared. I signed an NDA. Cannot talk about specifics, but I wanted you to know. Carl's voice cracked. I wanted you to know, I'm glad you didn't quit. I quit, took their money, stayed silent, and it's eaten at me for 30 years. You did what you had to do. No, Carl shook his head. I did what was easy. You're doing what's hard, and it matters. Even if you lose, it matters that someone tried. I don't plan on losing. Carl smiled, sad and knowing. I didn't either. But win or lose, you stood up. That's more than I did. He got back in his car, drove away. Marcus watched until the taillights disappeared. That night, Marcus updated his documentation, added new evidence from Brooks, notes from Patricia, timeline of events since the article published, building a record that extended beyond legal strategy into something like history. So if he lost, if this all fell apart, at least the truth would exist somewhere. Written down, documented, real. He thought about Sarah, about how she died without knowing why, about the garden she'd tended, the water she'd drunk, the air she'd breathed. All of it contaminated, all of it slow poison. And he thought about the people who'd done this, corporate executives who'd looked at soil test results and profit margins and chosen profit. engineers who'd installed pipes knowing where they led, lawyers who'd buried lawsuits under paperwork and technicalities, an entire system of people who'd decided that Marcus's land, Harold Chen's land, the health of farming families, mattered less than quarterly earnings. He felt anger, cold and controlled, not rage, just the steady burn of purpose. They'd made a mistake thinking he was like the others, thinking he'd take money and stay quiet, thinking fear would work. Marcus Wade had been to war, real war, where people shot at you and IEDs tore through convoys, and you learned that fear was just noise you pushed through to do the job. This was war too. Different weapons, different tactics, but war nonetheless. And he'd been trained by the best military in the world to fight when the odds were bad and the mission was clear. His mission was clear: expose the truth, prove the crime, make them pay. He looked at Duke sleeping in the corner, looked at the fence standing solid in the darkness, looked at the poisoned land he'd sworn to protect. 3 weeks until court, 60 days until federal indictments, 6 months until trial. He could last that long. He'd lasted this long. Marcus Wade settled in for the siege, alone behind his fence, armed with evidence, waiting for dawn and the next battle in a war he hadn't started but refused to lose. Outside, November wind rattled the steel panels. Inside, a man who'd lost almost everything prepared to lose the rest if that's what truth demanded. The fence held. The evidence remained. The fight continued. And somewhere in the darkness, the poison in the ground waited to be acknowledged, measured, punished, cleaned. Justice moved slow, but it was moving. Marcus just had to survive until it arrived. Winter came hard that year. First snow fell the week before Thanksgiving, unusual for Iowa in November. Marcus watched it accumulate on the fence, white against steel, softening the harsh lines but changing nothing fundamental. The barrier remained. The siege continued. The defamation hearing was postponed twice. AgriCentral's lawyers filing motions, requesting delays, burying Patricia in paperwork. Standard tactic: delay until your opponent runs out of money or will. But Marcus had neither money nor will to lose. Just time. And time he could spend. He used it preparing. Reading case law Patricia sent him. Understanding the technical arguments, the legal framework. He couldn't argue in court, but he could understand the battlefield. Know the terrain. That was basic tactics. Army taught you that before anything else. The media attention ebbed and flowed like tide. Week 1 after the article, it was national news. Week 2, still significant. By week 3, other stories took over. School shooting in Texas, political scandal in Washington. The news cycle moved on, but the local attention remained. Marcus's fence stayed famous in Cedar County. People drove by just to photograph it. The traitor graffiti now iconic in its way. He didn't clean it off, let it stand. Testimony to something he couldn't quite name. Division maybe, or the cost of truth, or just human anger finding a target. December brought the federal grand jury. Agent Brooks called with updates he probably shouldn't share, but did anyway. 18 counts. Conspiracy, fraud, knowing endangerment, violation of Clean Water Act, false statements to regulators. We're indicting 3 executives in the corporation itself. When? Indictments sealed until arrests are coordinated, probably early January. Then it goes public and all hell breaks loose. More hell than already loose. Brooks laughed, sound without humor. Mr. Wade, what's happening now is a light rain. What's coming is a hurricane. Marcus thought about hurricanes. Thought about Iraq, watching sandstorms roll across the desert, turning day into night, filling every crack and crevice with grit. You couldn't stop storms. Could only hunker down and wait them out. That's what he did. Hunkered down, behind his fence, waiting. Christmas approached, and Marcus bought nothing, decorated nothing. The house stayed dark except for rooms he used. Kitchen, bedroom, living room where Duke slept. The rest gathered dust and memories. Sarah's sewing room, the guest bedroom that had been meant for grandchildren who never came. On Christmas Eve, Gene Patterson showed up. Hadn't spoken to Marcus since that angry phone call months ago. He stood at the gate, old man in an older coat, breath misting white. Marcus let him in without speaking. They walked to the house. Marcus made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table like they'd done 100 times over the years. Back when things were simpler. Before poison and lawsuits and national news. I was wrong. Gene said it quietly, not looking at Marcus, looking at his coffee mug. My nephew lost his job. Plants cutting staff. 30% layoffs. They're saying it's because of the legal costs, the EPA fines coming. Everyone blames you. I know, but I went to see him yesterday. He looked. Gene paused, searching for words. Scared. Not angry. Scared. Said he'd been having headaches for months. Nosebleeds. Doctor told him it was stress. But now he's wondering. Gene finally looked up. I tested my soil, like you said. Results came back last week. Contaminated. Not as bad as yours, but bad enough. 40 years I've been farming that land, raised my kids there, and the whole time it was poison. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, be right, and you are. You're right, and I was wrong, and I came here to say that. Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen. Not forgiveness. Gene didn't need forgiveness. Just recognition that the truth mattered more than Marcus being liked. Thank you. They sat in silence. Outside, snow continued falling, covering the fields, the fence, the contaminated soil, making everything look clean and new, lying the way only nature could lie. Gene left before dark, shook Marcus's hand at the gate, drove away. Marcus stood watching the tire tracks fill with fresh snow. One ally, maybe more to come. Maybe not, but one was more than yesterday. New Year's came quiet. Marcus marked it alone, Duke asleep at his feet, thinking about the year past. Sarah had been gone 8 years now. Felt like longer. Felt like yesterday. Time was strange that way, elastic and rigid all at once. He thought about what the new year would bring. Trials probably, federal prosecution, civil litigation, more media, more pressure. The storm Brooks had promised. But also maybe resolution, maybe justice, maybe proof that one man standing alone could move something larger than himself. Or maybe nothing would change. Maybe AgriCentral would settle, pay fines, restructure, continue. Maybe Marcus would win legally but lose practically. Land still contaminated, communities still divided. Sarah still dead from poison no court could undo. He didn't know, couldn't predict, could only wait and see. January 5th, the arrests happened. FBI coordinated raid, dawn timing. 3 executives taken into custody at their homes. Perp walks for the cameras. AgriCentral's stock dropped 40% in one day. The news coverage was massive. Network television, cable news, international press. The story Marcus had uncovered going global. Iowa farmer versus chemical giant. Environmental crime, cover-up, conspiracy. His phone rang constantly. Marcus didn't answer. Let Patricia handle everything. She was good at it. Better than him. Knew how to feed the story without giving away strategy. But one call Marcus took. Unknown number. Probably should have ignored it. Didn't. Mr. Wade, this is Richard Brennan. Marcus recognized the name. AgriCentral's CEO. The man who'd gone on television calling Marcus's allegations baseless. I don't have anything to say to you. Please, just listen. Brennan's voice sounded tired. Old, I'm not. This wasn't my doing. I took over as CEO in 2016. I didn't know about the disposal system. Didn't know about the contamination. When your story broke, when EPA started digging, I found out the same time you did. You expect me to believe that? No, I don't. But it's true. The people who did this, who built that system, who maintained it, they hid it from me. Buried it in maintenance records and shell contractors. And now, he stopped. Now I'm the face of a crime I didn't commit. You ran the company. You're responsible. I know. Brennan sounded defeated. That's what responsibility means. Answering for sins you didn't know were being committed. I'm calling because I wanted you to know. Not all of us are monsters. Some of us are just, negligent, ignorant, complicit through not asking the right questions. Why tell me this? Because in 3 weeks I'm resigning. Because my lawyers tell me I might face charges anyway. Because 800 people are losing jobs, and it's my fault for not seeing what was under my own roof. And because, Brennan's voice cracked, because you were right and I was wrong, and someone needed to say that. He hung up. Marcus sat holding the phone, wondering if it was truth or strategy. Probably both. Probably Brennan genuinely hadn't known. Probably that didn't matter. Ignorance wasn't defense when you had responsibility. Marcus understood that. He'd owned contaminated land for 20 years without knowing. Did that absolve him? No. Just made him a different kind of victim. The civil suit trial started February 3rd, federal courthouse in Des Moines. Patricia had filed the case not as defense but offense. Wrongful contamination. knowing endangerment, conspiracy to conceal, asking for actual damages plus punitive, $100 million. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table wearing a suit he'd bought at Goodwill. Felt wrong, constricting. But Patricia said appearances mattered. Jury needed to see a farmer, not a crusader. The defense table held 6 lawyers, expensive suits, expensive haircuts, expensive strategy. They looked confident. They looked prepared. They looked like they were going to destroy Marcus Wade. Trial lasted 3 weeks. Patricia presented evidence piece by piece, building narrative, photographs of pipes, lab results, Professor Wu's analysis, historical documents from the Chen case, FBI seizure records showing internal memos, each day stacking proof higher. The defense argued technicalities, statute of limitations, property transfer broke chain of liability. Marcus should have known earlier. Due diligence failures. They questioned every sample, every photograph, every conclusion. Marcus sat through it all, listening, learning, watching the jury, 12 people who'd decide if truth mattered more than corporate protections. He testified on day 8. Patricia walked him through his story, finding the letter, digging up the pipes, building the fence, uncovering evidence, speaking clearly, simply, like he was explaining crop rotation. Facts, just facts. The defense cross-examined for 6 hours, tried to break him, tried to make him angry, tried to catch him in contradictions. Marcus stayed steady, answered every question the same way, with truth. By day 15, the defense ran out of strategies. Their expert witnesses contradicted each other. Their documentation proved Patricia's case more than their own. The jury looked tired of corporate doublespeak. Closing arguments happened on a Thursday. Patricia spoke for 90 minutes, showed the jury the modern pipe section, the thermal imaging, the FBI memos. Then she held up a photograph, Sarah's obituary. This is Sarah Wade, Marcus's wife, died at 49 from lung cancer. No smoking, no family history, no explanation. She paused, just lived on contaminated land for 20 years, drank poisoned water, breathed tainted air, and died. The defense objected, judge sustained it, but the jury had seen, had understood. The defense closing was professional, polished, empty, asking the jury to consider complexity, asking them to weigh corporate responsibility against individual liability, asking them to split differences and find middle ground. But there was no middle ground between poison and clean water, between truth and lies, between justice and convenience. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Marcus waited in a hotel room in Des Moines. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just waited. Patricia called at 4 p.m. on day 2. Verdict's in, we're going back to court. What did they say? Won't know until the judge reads it. 30 minutes. Marcus drove to the courthouse, walked through protesters, some supporting him, some calling him job killer, police keeping them separated. He climbed the steps, entered the courtroom, sat at the plaintiff's table. The jury filed in. None of them looked at him. Patricia said that was a good sign or bad sign, impossible to read. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of wrongful contamination, how do you find? We find for the plaintiff. Marcus felt his heart stop, then start again, harder. On the charge of knowing endangerment, how do you find? We find for the plaintiff. On the charge of conspiracy to conceal, how do you find? We find for the plaintiff. The judge read through all counts, guilty on every one. Then came damages. What is your award for actual damages? $42 million. Gasps in the courtroom. Marcus felt dizzy. What is your award for punitive damages? $150 million. More gasps. Someone behind Marcus started crying. The defense table sat frozen. Patricia gripped Marcus's arm, whispered something he couldn't hear over the blood rushing in his ears. Total award, $192 million. The judge thanked his jury, set dates for appeals, dismissed them. The courtroom erupted, media scrambling for phones, lawyers conferring in urgent huddles, protesters outside starting to cheer or shout, or both. Marcus sat very still. He'd won. The biggest environmental settlement in Iowa history. Justice served. Truth vindicated. So why did he feel empty? The appeals took 8 months. AgriCentral fought every finding, requested new trials, claimed judicial bias, filed motions that filled bankers' boxes. But every appeal was denied. Every motion rejected. The verdict stood. In October, the company settled, agreed to pay the full award, agreed to comprehensive cleanup supervised by EPA, agreed to monitoring for 30 years, agreed to compensate other affected landowners. Total cost to AgriCentral, $400 million. Stock never recovered. Company sold to a European conglomerate 6 months later. Cedar County plant closed permanently. 800 jobs gone. Marcus received his portion. After lawyers' fees, after liens, after taxes, $48 million. More money than he'd make in 10 lifetimes of farming. He sat in his kitchen looking at the bank statement. Numbers that didn't feel real. Wealth that came from Sarah's death, from poison, from fighting. What was he supposed to do with it? Buy a new tractor, take a vacation, retire to Florida like old men in commercials. He did none of those things. Instead, he established a fund, the Sarah Wade Environmental Health Foundation, $40 million, dedicated to testing private wells in rural Iowa. Free testing, free remediation if contamination found, free legal help for farmers fighting corporations. He kept $8 million, enough to live on, enough to rebuild the barn that had burned, enough to fix the truck they'd sabotaged, enough to hire help cleaning up his own land. The cleanup took 3 years. EPA contractors removing contaminated soil, installing new drainage, monitoring groundwater, slowly, painfully slowly making the land safe again. Marcus watched it happen from his porch. Strangers in hazmat suits excavating his fields. Giant machines moving poisoned earth. The visible manifestation of invisible crime. The fence came down in year 2, not because Marcus wanted it down, but because EPA needed access, needed to bring in equipment too large for the gates. Once down, it didn't go back up. Marcus didn't rebuild it. The boundary that had protected him, isolated him, defined him, gone. His property was open again, exposed, but also cleaned, healing. The community changed slower than the land. Some people apologized. Like Gene had, like Tom Bradley who'd lost his farm too, contamination making it unsaleable. Like the woman from church whose husband had died. Others stayed angry, blamed Marcus for the job losses, for the plant closure, for AgriCentral leaving Cedar County. They'd lost livelihoods and he'd gained millions. The math didn't balance in their eyes. Marcus understood, didn't agree, but understood. He stayed on the farm, alone still. Duke had died the previous winter, old age claiming him peacefully in his sleep. Marcus buried him on the hill overlooking the southeast corner, where the dog had refused to go, where the worst contamination had been, where truth had started. He got a new dog, another rescue, named her Scout, lab mix, young and energetic, kept him moving when grief made him want to stop. 3 years after the verdict, Laura Chen published her book, The Fence, One Man's Fight Against Corporate Poison. It was thorough, honest, made Marcus uncomfortable with how much it praised his courage. He read it once, never again. Seeing his story in print made it feel distant, like it had happened to someone else. Maybe it had. The man who'd received that first letter 4 years ago felt different from the man he was now. Older, lonelier, wealthier, sadder, but also maybe clearer about what mattered. The land, the truth, the fight. 4 years and 2 months after it all started, Marcus stood at his kitchen window, morning coffee in the same chipped mug. Sarah's mug. The crack had grown longer, but it still held liquid, still did its job. Outside, his fields lay empty, fallow, healing. EPA said another 2 years before planting was advisable. Maybe 3. The poison took 40 years to accumulate. Couldn't expect it to disappear overnight. His phone rang, unknown number. He'd learned to answer those now. Sometimes they were important. Mr. Wade, this is Jennifer Morrison. I'm a farmer in Wisconsin. I found contamination on my land. Traced it to a chemical plant upstream. They're threatening to sue me for defamation. I can't. I read about what you did and her voice broke. I need help. Marcus closed his eyes, felt the weight of it. Another fight, another farmer, another corporation thinking silence could be bought or enforced. Tell me what you found. He listened for 20 minutes, took notes, heard his own story reflected back. Different state, different company, same crime, same pattern. When she finished, he gave her Patricia's number, gave her the foundation's contact information, told her about documentation, Evidence, staying steady. Then he said something he needed to hear himself say. You can win this. It'll cost you. Not just money, peace, community. It'll take parts of you that don't grow back, but you can win. Is it worth it? Marcus looked out at his healing land, thought about Sarah, about Duke buried on the hill, about the fence that had come down, about $48 million he'd trade in a heartbeat for his wife back. I don't know, he said. Honest answer. I don't know if it's worth it. I just know it's necessary. They talked for another 10 minutes. He gave her courage he didn't fully feel. Gave her hope that was part truth, part wish. Gave her what he'd needed 4 years ago when he'd stood alone holding a lawyer's letter. After hanging up, Marcus sat at the table. Scout came over, rested her head on his knee. He scratched behind her ears. The sun rose higher, light spreading across fields that had been poisoned, fought over, cleaned, and now waited patiently for the future. Marcus thought about the fence, how he'd built it in desperation, how it had become famous, how it had come down without ceremony. Panels sold for scrap, foundation posts pulled from earth, only photographs remaining, evidence of a boundary that had mattered intensely for a brief time. He thought about Harold Chen, dead at 52, fighting the same fight 40 years earlier, losing because he'd been alone. And Marcus thought about Jennifer Morrison in Wisconsin, starting her own fight now, probably scared, definitely alone, needing to know someone had walked this path before. That was his purpose now, he realized. Not farming, not spending money he didn't want, but being proof that the fight could be won. Being evidence that standing up mattered even when it cost everything. He was 59 years old, too old to start over, too stubborn to quit, too tired to keep fighting his own battle, but not too tired to help others fight theirs. The foundation would do that, continue after he was gone, turn his suffering into other people's salvation. Maybe that was justice, not victory, not revenge, just transformation, pain becoming purpose. Marcus stood up, walked outside. Scout bounded ahead, chasing nothing, happy in the way only dogs could be happy. Simple, present, unconcerned with past or future. He walked to where the fence had stood. The ground was healing there too, grass growing where steel had blocked sun, nature reclaiming what humans had interrupted. In the distance, town was waking up, Cedar County continuing despite the plant closing. Some people had moved away. Others had found new work. The economy had adjusted because economies always did. Survival was built into the system. But trust, that took longer to rebuild. Some people still wouldn't speak to Marcus, still blamed him, still saw him as destroyer rather than revealer. That was fine. He didn't need their approval. Never had. Just needed to know he'd done what was right, even when right was hard. A car approached on his county road, slowed, turned into his driveway. Marcus watched it come. New truck, clean, professional. A woman got out, 30-something, carrying a briefcase. She walked toward him with the determination of someone on a mission. Mr. Wade, that's me. I'm from the EPA regional office. We'd like to hire you as a consultant, teaching farmers how to identify contamination, document evidence, protect themselves legally. I'm not a scientist, no, but you're someone who figured it out anyway. That's more valuable than credentials. Marcus thought about that, thought about spending his remaining years helping others, being useful, turning his experience into expertise. All right, he said, I'll do it. They talked logistics, compensation, schedule. The woman left her card, drove away. Marcus stood in the driveway holding a piece of paper that offered him purpose. That evening, he sat on his porch, same spot he'd sat thousands of evenings before. But the view had changed. No fence, no barrier, just open land rolling toward horizon. Scout sat beside him. New dog, old routine, continuity in small things. Marcus thought about Sarah, whether she'd be proud or disappointed. Proud of the fight, disappointed by the cost, probably both. She'd been practical that way. He thought about the 40 years of poison that had accumulated in his soil, the invisible crime that had taken so much. His wife, his peace, his community's trust. And he thought about justice, how it had come but not the way movies promised. No triumphant music, no restoration of what was lost, just money and vindication in the slow work of healing land that would never be the same. Was it worth it? The question Jennifer Morrison had asked, the question Gene Patterson had implied, the question Marcus asked himself in quiet moments. He still didn't have an answer. Probably never would. Some questions weren't meant to be answered, just carried. The sun set, orange and red spreading across November sky. 4 years later, full circle, same season as when the letter had arrived, when the fence went up, when everything changed. Marcus stood, walked inside, fed Scout, made dinner he barely tasted, cleaned up. Normal evening, normal life. Except nothing was normal anymore. Everything had shifted 6 inches to the left and stayed there. Before bed, he wrote in his journal, habit he'd kept since the Army, 1 entry per day, no matter what. November 14th, 4 years since I found the pipe. Jennifer Morrison from Wisconsin called today. Another farmer, another fight. I told her she could win, told her it was necessary even if not worth it. Truth is, I still don't know what I won. The land is cleaner, the corporation paid, the truth came out. But Sarah's still dead, the community's still broken, I'm still alone. Maybe that's what justice looks like. Not restoration, but acknowledgement. Not healing, but honesty. Not victory, but refusal to let them bury the truth with the poison. The fence is gone, but I still feel it sometimes. Still think in terms of inside and outside, protected and exposed, before and after. I don't know if I'd do it again, knowing what I know now. I don't know if I was brave or stupid or just too stubborn to quit. I just know I couldn't stay silent. Couldn't let them keep poisoning land and people and truth. That has to mean something, has to be enough. Tomorrow I start consultant work with EPA, teaching others, passing on hard-won knowledge. Scout is good company, the land is healing, winter's coming. I'm still here, still steady. That's all I've got. He closed the journal, turned off the light, lay in bed listening to silence. Scout breathing softly in the corner, house settling around him, old wood and old memories. Outside, the land that had been battlefield was becoming farm again. Slowly, painfully, incompletely. But becoming. Marcus closed his eyes, thought about tomorrow, about farmers who needed help, about land that needed protecting, about fights that needed fighting. He'd do it, not because it would fix what was broken, but because broken things still needed tending, still deserved care. The fence was gone. The poison was being cleaned. The truth was documented. And Marcus Wade, 59 years old, alone, wealthy in money but poor in things that mattered, was still standing, still steady, still here. That would have to be enough, because it was all he had left to give.